Hi, I'm Rowan. You ever watch your own family pretend you don't exist? At my brother's wedding, they sat my grandfather by the restroom like he was an afterthought. I spoke up, just one sentence, and my father slapped me in front of everyone. What they didn't know was Grandpa had planned to give my brother $7.4 million that night. But by the time the microphone came on, I had already taken Grandpa by the arm and walked him out. And now, I've got 30 missed calls on my phone, but not one of them asks if I'm okay. What kind of family does that? Would you have stayed, or would you have walked away too? I got to the venue a little after noon, the heat from the Houston sun still clinging to my shirt as I stepped into the ballroom. The place was buzzing, glasses clinking, photographers calling for poses, people laughing a little louder than usual because it was a wedding and that's what folks do. Still, even in all that noise, I felt like I always do at family events. Halfway present, halfway forgotten. Being the youngest son in my family meant I grew up learning how to stay out of the way. And on days like this, the lesson came back sharp. I scanned the tables, trying to figure out where Grandpa might be. He doesn't move as quickly as he used to, and I didn't want him wandering around alone. When I didn't see him up front with the rest of the family, I walked along the side aisle, and then I stopped. Grandpa was sitting in a lonely chair pushed against the wall, right next to the restroom door. Each time someone walked in or out, the draft nudged his jacket. A few guests brushed past him, some even bumped his shoulder without so much as a glance. The man who practically raised me sat like an afterthought. I froze. My first thought was that this had to be a mistake. Somebody must have put the chair there temporarily, but then I noticed the little folded card taped to the seat back. Assigned seating. Purposeful. My chest tightened. I walked over, kneeling so he wouldn't have to crane his neck. "Grandpa, why are you sitting here?" I asked quietly. He gave a soft smile, gentle but tired. "They said this was fine. Close to the door. Easy for me." "Easy for them," I muttered before I could stop myself. A few people walked by again. One woman barely avoided spilling her drink on him. She didn't apologize, just frowned, as if he were in her way. That was the moment I felt the first spark of real anger. "Come on," I said, standing up. "Let's get you a proper seat." Before I could touch the chair, a wedding coordinator, one I'd seen following my mother around earlier, hurried over. "Sir, please don't move that. The seating chart is finalized." "It's my grandfather," I said. "He shouldn't be next to the restroom." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Your parents were very firm about this arrangement." It was the way she said it, careful, rehearsed, that made something in me twist. "I'll talk to them," I said, swallowing the irritation building in my throat. Before I stepped away, Grandpa reached out and pressed something into my hand, his old cotton handkerchief, the one he always kept folded neatly in his pocket. "You notice what others don't, son," he whispered. "Keep this." There was something in his tone. Not sad exactly. More like he already knew how the day would unfold. I slipped the handkerchief into my pocket and made my way toward the front tables. My parents were standing near the floral arch, talking to relatives as if everything in the room belonged to them. "Why is Grandpa sitting by the restroom?" I asked steadily. My father barely turned his head. "Rowan, not now." "That's not a place for him." "He'll be fine," my mother said, waving a hand like she was shooing a fly. "He doesn't need to be in the middle of everything." My father leaned closer, voice dropping. "And honestly, He won't be here long anyway. Let him sit somewhere convenient. I felt the words like a slap before the actual slap ever happened later. Cold, unthinking, cruel. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. They hadn't just overlooked him. They meant to put him there. They wanted him out of sight, out of mind, like some fragile burden they didn't feel like dealing with today. A familiar weight settled in my stomach. Not surprise, just the old ache of realizing, again, how this family operates. I walked back toward Grandpa, each step heavier than the last. Guests were still whispering. One woman nudged her friend and asked, "Is he part of the staff? He looks like someone they put there to guide people." Humiliation burned through me. I kept my voice steady as I sat beside him. "You doing all right?" I asked. He nodded, though his eyes told a different story. I slid my thumb along the edge of the handkerchief in my pocket, the fabric worn soft from years of use. Holding it grounded me, reminded me of every moment he'd shown up for me when no one else had. In that instant, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wasn't going to let him spend this day invisible. Not today, not anymore. I started to rise, ready to move him myself. Consequences be damned. The moment I straightened my back, ready to lift Grandpa from that miserable spot by the restroom door, my father slid in front of me so quickly it nearly made me stumble. It was as if he'd been watching my every move, waiting for the exact second I'd cross a line he'd drawn in his own mind. His expression wasn't confused or concerned. It was the look he used to give me when I was a kid, and he caught me reaching for something I wasn't worthy of touching. I paused, keeping my voice steady. "Dad, let me help him up." He leaned in close enough that I could feel the heat from his breath. "Stay out of the way today. Don't start something." The tone cut deeper than the words. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even guidance. It was suppression, sharp, familiar, and humiliating. Twist S3 wasn't just a moment. It was a reminder of how easily he still tried to put me in my place. I forced myself not to react too quickly. "He was seated next to the restroom," I said, keeping my voice low. "People are bumping into him. This isn't right." My father's jaw tightened. He didn't even glance in Grandpa's direction. "He won't remember half of this anyway." That sentence, I felt something in my chest twist. This wasn't oversight. This was intention. They put him there because it was convenient. Convenient for them, not for him. A couple of guests nearby had stopped pretending not to watch. Their eyes flicked from my father's stance to my expression. Social tension tightened the air. My family always hated attention unless they controlled it, and Dad knew that being stared at made me uneasy. Still, I held my ground. "He deserves better," I said evenly. Dad's eyes flashed. He raised his voice, not dramatically, but enough for the people nearby to hear clearly. "Shut your mouth and go sit down." It wasn't the first time he dismissed me like that, but hearing it spoken publicly, with guests assessing us like spectators at some awkward show, hit differently. Twist S4 wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. I didn't matter. Not here, not now, not ever. Not to him. For a moment, I let silence settle. My face burned, but I refused to lower my gaze. "I'm not leaving him there," I said quietly. The murmurs grew louder. It wasn't shouting, but the subtle hum of discomfort. People shifting in their chairs, someone whispering, "Is everything okay over there?" Another person saying, "That older man looks uncomfortable." Dad heard all of it. He despised losing control of a narrative. He snapped. His hand struck my cheek so quickly I didn't see it coming. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the conversations like a blade. A couple near us froze mid-sentence. Another person gasped. I tasted a bit of metal on my tongue, though I wasn't bleeding, just shocked at how familiar the sting felt. I didn't lift a hand to my face. I didn't step back. I simply looked at him, steady and unflinching. If he expected me to crumble, he'd miscalculated. Behind him, Grandpa struggled to push himself upright. His hands trembled as he reached out to me. That sight hurt more than the slap, more than the words. That man had protected me my whole childhood. Now he was watching me get struck like I was nothing. I stepped around my father without another word. My father hissed under his breath, "Do not pick him up. I'm warning you." Warnings from him used to mean something, used to make me retreat. But the weight of Grandpa's handkerchief in my pocket felt like an anchor and a push at the same time. A couple of guests subtly tilted their phones, pretending to check messages while framing us in their screens. It didn't bother me, not anymore. I reached for Grandpa's arm gently, locking his hand in mine. The moment my hand closed around Grandpa's arm, the noise in the room seemed to thin out, like someone had drawn a curtain across the chatter. People didn't stop talking completely, but their voices settled into a low, uneasy hum. It felt as if the entire hall sensed something shifting, even if they didn't know why. I didn't look around. All my focus was on steadying Grandpa, helping him rise without causing him pain. But as I bent slightly to pull the chair away from the wall, something inside me loosened, something I'd worked hard to bury for a long time. It startled me how quickly the present dissolved into memory. In a blink, I was 12 again. I saw myself standing in the school gym, holding a certificate I'd earned for a history project. My teacher had invited families to celebrate, and I'd been excited all week. When my father arrived, instead of sharing the moment, he pulled me aside and said in a low voice, "Don't embarrass the family. Stand straight and say as little as possible. Let your brother speak for us." The words, thrown so casually, had stunned me back then. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had simply been a kid wanting to show my work. Yet that phrase, "Don't embarrass the family," followed me for years, shaping how small I made myself. Now lifting Grandpa from that chair, the memory wrapped around me with a sting I hadn't felt in a long time. Twist S5 wasn't just a childhood moment. It was the beginning of a lifetime of being silenced before I'd even learned to speak up. Another memory crept in right behind it. I must have been around 15. My father had invited a few neighbors over for a cookout. My older brother stood with him at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing loudly. I approached to help, hoping to be included. Dad didn't even look at me when he said, "Let your brother handle it. He's the real man of the house." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "You're too soft. You always have been." It had felt like having a rug pulled out from under me. That ache, the one that whispers you'll never measure up, settled so deeply that I carried it into adulthood without realizing how heavy it had become. Those memories washed over me in seconds, but they landed with the weight of years. When I blinked back to the present, my father was still behind me, watching closely, ready to intercept me again. But before I even turned fully toward him, another presence caught my attention. My brother. He stood near the front of the room, half hidden behind a group of relatives. His expression wasn't angry or sympathetic. It was blank, calculated, almost bored. He saw our father shove me aside earlier. He saw the slap. He saw Grandpa placed next to a restroom door at his own wedding. And he did nothing. It wasn't new behavior. It wasn't surprising. But at that moment, twist S6 became painfully clear. He had always benefited from my silence. If I spoke up, the balance he enjoyed would tilt. If I stayed quiet, his world stayed perfect. A quiet betrayal settled in my chest, not loud or sharp, but heavy, making it hard to draw breath. My thoughts churned. Why did I stay quiet so long? Out of fear? Out of loyalty? Or because I kept hoping they might eventually see me as part of the family instead of an inconvenience? I wasn't sure. Maybe it was all of those things. But then Grandpa's hand tightened around mine. His grip was weak, but the intention behind it was strong enough to steady everything inside me. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the same man who'd sat on the porch teaching me how to sand wood, who'd told me that kindness was not weakness, who had defended me in ways no one else ever had. He needed me now. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't the helpless kid they had conditioned me to be. I stood up straighter, my hand firm around his. The whispers in the room no longer mattered. The stares didn't matter. Even the sharp glare from my father felt distant, like it was aimed at someone I no longer recognized as myself. Then my mother stepped forward, her face split between a polite smile for the guests and cold irritation for me. She leaned in as if adjusting Grandpa's jacket, but her voice slipped out through her teeth. "Stop making a scene. You always ruin things." That sentence sliced deeper than the slap from earlier, not because it was loud, she made sure no one else heard, but because it was the same line she'd used to shut me down since I was young. It was her way of telling me my feelings were unacceptable, my presence inconvenient. Something inside me broke, quietly but definitively. I looked at her, then at my father, then at my brother, and I understood with perfect clarity, nothing I said or did would ever earn their respect. Their approval had been a moving target my entire life, and I had exhausted myself chasing it. I wasn't chasing it anymore. I turned my attention back to Grandpa, who looked up at me with confusion but also trust. I nodded once, more to myself than to him. I would not leave him in that chair. I would not swallow this disrespect. I would not carry the role they had forced on me any longer. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it. Not with anger, but with resolve. I didn't turn around to check who was watching. I already knew. The silence was too heavy to be anything but judgmental. My shoes tapped against the tile as I guided Grandpa forward, one slow step at a time, his hand still gripping mine like a lifeline. His breathing was shallow, but there was calm in it. Trust, the kind that can't be faked. We were maybe 10 steps from the main exit when I heard it, those unmistakable, heavy steps behind me. They didn't hurry. My father didn't need to rush to make a point. Each footfall carried weight, the kind of sound that once made me shrink when I was 10, 12, 15. But I didn't shrink this time. I just held Grandpa's arm a little tighter and kept walking. Then fingers clamped down on my shoulder. Hard. I stumbled slightly as he spun me halfway toward him. My father's face was so close, I could see the tight lines around his eyes. The way he clenched his jaw so hard, the skin there twitched. "Take one more step," he said, voice low and sharp, "and you're out of this family." There it was. Twist S7. The ultimatum. He didn't even try to hide it behind concern or decorum. Not even a whisper of shame that guests were now openly staring. "You're doing this?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Behind him, a semicircle was forming, guests unsure whether to help, to turn away, or to pretend none of this was happening. Some whispered, "Is that his dad?" Others just stared. Wine glasses paused mid-air, conversations forgotten. I didn't let go of Grandpa. I said, "He's not staying by that restroom." My father leaned in again. "If you walk him out," he hissed, "don't bother coming back." I looked past him and caught my mother's eye. She didn't speak. She didn't step forward. She just stood there, holding a glass of champagne like it was a shield, avoiding my gaze. That stung more than anything he said. Then my brother showed up. I thought, maybe for once he'd have my back. Instead, he looked around at the guests, let out a breath like I was the inconvenience, then said, "Can you stop? You're ruining the day for everyone." Twist S8 wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. But it might as well have been a slap. He wasn't angry. He was embarrassed. By me. Just like always. Grandpa's grip tightened. His voice came out soft, rasped by age and emotion. "It's all right, son. We can go." I glanced at him. His eyes were tired, but kind. That kind of softness doesn't survive in people like him unless they fight to keep it. And I knew in that moment I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't broken. I nodded once, turned back toward the exit. My father stepped in front again, this time full body, arms out just enough to block the way. He wasn't yelling, but the control in his stance said everything. "You don't get to walk away. Not unless I let you." People around us weren't hiding their curiosity anymore. Some pulled out. Phones. Most just looked uncomfortable, the way people do when they're watching something personal happen in a public place, intimate in the worst way. I swallowed, but not out of fear. "Move," I said, not loud, just final. He blinked. Maybe he hadn't expected defiance. Not from me. Mom stepped forward finally, still trying to keep her smile up for appearances, but her voice was clipped, urgent. "Just apologize. Fix this before it gets worse." I didn't. Instead, I shifted to my left, guiding Grandpa gently around his arm. And then, it happened. That sound. That low, collective gasp. We stepped into the lobby, not just physically, but across a line I was never supposed to cross. He didn't follow immediately. That was the most unnerving part. For a few steps, it was just me and Grandpa. The lobby doors gently whooshing shut behind us, the heavy hush of disbelief still clinging to the air like humidity before a storm. Then I heard it. His voice, louder than it needed to be, aimed at everyone nearby. "You always do this. Always make everything about you." It was like being 12 again. Like that night at the parent-teacher conference when I'd asked a question about my science project, and he'd pulled me aside later to hiss, "You embarrassed me in front of people who matter." Same tone. Same cold fury. I stopped walking. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt it, that familiar, invisible thread between his disappointment and my shame tightening around my throat. My shoulders tensed. I could feel every eye in the lobby turning our way. Some of the hotel staff looked toward the front desk, unsure whether they should step in. A valet paused mid-step. A woman near the elevators pulled her child a little closer. I turned slowly, still holding Grandpa's arm. "I'm not making this about me," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. "You put him next to a restroom. No one even offered him water. He's not furniture." My father's mouth twisted like he was trying not to laugh. "Spare me the dramatics," he said. "You don't care about him. You just want to feel like a hero." That was it. Twist S9. In front of strangers, in front of Grandpa, He twisted what I did into self-centeredness. And for a moment, I wondered if they believed him. Did they see an ungrateful son making a scene? A grown man throwing a tantrum on his brother's wedding day? My voice cracked when I tried to reply. The words just stuck. All those years of being told to stay quiet came roaring back. For a split second, I was the scared kid again, blinking up at a man who always seemed 10 feet tall. But then, Grandpa squeezed my arm. "You're doing right, son," he whispered. 5 simple words, but they landed like a lifeline. My chest tightened. Not from panic, but from something steadier, deeper. I looked at my father again, and this time, I didn't flinch. "I'm done being quiet," I said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the first time I said something to him without immediately second-guessing it. My mother gasped, a sharp intake of breath, like I'd just knocked over the wedding cake. My brother muttered, "Here we go," under his breath, like I was a burden they'd been stuck with for too long. I didn't care anymore. "If you try to stop us again," I said slowly, "I'll leave this wedding for good." There it was. Twist S10. A line drawn, not with shouting or chaos, but with calm that felt scarier than rage. My father's lips curled in disbelief. "You? Leave?" He laughed. "You don't have the guts." That old tactic again. Mockery, like my backbone was. Something he built and could still dismantle. But this time, it didn't work. I turned halfway toward the exit, Grandpa still leaning gently against my side. We were close now. I could see the valet desk through the glass, cars pulling in and out, the day still sunny outside like none of this was happening. I almost paused, almost looked back and apologized, like I always had. Like I did the night I didn't speak up when he made Grandpa sit in the cold garage at Christmas, so he wouldn't make a mess. But in the reflection of the glass door, I saw myself, not a kid, not the forgotten one, just a man standing for something, finally. I met my father's eyes one more time and said, "This is your last warning." Silence rippled through the lobby. No one moved. No one spoke. And instead of backing down, my father decided he wasn't done humiliating me. His hand came fast, faster than I expected. Maybe part of me still believed he wouldn't do it again. Not here, not now. But he did. His palm met the side of my face with a crack so loud it seemed to pause time itself. I didn't stumble. I didn't cry out. I just stood there, cheeks stinging, the heat rising as fast as the shame. The air was sucked out of the lobby. I heard a gasp, then a voice behind me whisper, "Oh my God!" Someone knocked over a glass near the check-in counter. The sound of it shattering barely registered. Grandpa gripped my arm tighter. "That's enough," he shouted, but the strain in his voice made it tremble and crack. It wasn't loud enough to stop anything. The slap wasn't what broke me. It was the silence that followed, from the people I once thought might care. Especially her. My mother walked over slowly, like she was coming to stop the bleeding. But she didn't look at me. She looked at the hotel staff, then at the surrounding guests. Her voice was low, nearly rehearsed. "Stop making a scene," she said. That was it. Twist S11. She had the chance to say something, to show the world I wasn't the one out of line. But she didn't. I stared at her. All the little memories came back like darts to the skin. The scraped knee she said I was too old to cry over. The fever she said I exaggerated. The silence every time Dad barked and I flinched. She never yelled. She just let him. The door behind us creaked again. My brother stepped out, tugging at his cufflinks with visible irritation. "What now?" he sighed. "We're trying to keep the event moving." Not a word to me. Not a glance at Grandpa. Just that same exhausted tone he always used when he felt I was being difficult. They didn't see the slap. Not really. They saw an inconvenience. Dad pointed a rigid finger at my chest. "You will not embarrass this family. Go back inside, sit down, and keep quiet." I felt a warm line of blood creeping from the corner of my mouth. I wiped it with the back of my hand and looked at the smear on my skin, and something changed. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't hoping for someone else to step in. I stepped forward, right between him and Grandpa. I placed my arm gently around Grandpa's back, steadying him, and said, clear enough for everyone nearby to hear, "We're leaving. Now. Twist S12. That was the break, the crack in the rule book my family never let me rewrite. Dad's nostrils flared. His hand moved like he was going to grab me again, but this time, someone else moved faster. A hotel security guard, tall and professional, stepped between us. "Sir," he said, firmly but not unkindly, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and take a step back." The tension broke into whispers. A woman in heels said, "Did he just hit his son?" Another man asked, "Is the older gentleman okay?" People were watching now. Really watching. And for once, they weren't watching me. They were watching him. My mother's face was flushed now, but not from concern. She leaned in, teeth clenched, voice almost hissing. "You're ruining your brother's wedding. Do you understand that?" I didn't hesitate. "No. You ruined it when you treated Grandpa like trash." She stepped back like I'd hit her, but I hadn't. I just finally told the truth out loud. I took Grandpa's hand again and led him out through the automatic doors. The air outside hit my lungs like a first breath after drowning. Bright sunlight. The sound of traffic. People still living their lives. Grandpa leaned on me more heavily now. "You didn't deserve that," he whispered. None of it. I didn't trust myself to speak, not right away. I could feel my throat tightening, that old pressure to shove everything down. Instead, I took the valet ticket from my pocket and handed it to the young man at the podium. "Car for Rowan Sinclair," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded and jogged off. Behind us, the glass doors stayed closed for a long moment. Then they opened again. My mother stood there, my brother a few steps behind, my father frozen at the threshold. No one followed. But none of them turned away either. They stood there like statues, staring, calculating, unsure what came next. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. Not mine. Theirs. And just when I thought the worst was over, my father made a move that proved he'd rather destroy me than admit he was wrong. I had just helped Grandpa into the passenger seat, his hand still trembling in mine, when I heard it, shouting. Not the happy kind, not laughter or celebration. This was sharper, urgent. A voice raised above the music, and then another. I turned my head toward the building. The lobby's glass doors framed chaos inside, servers darting back and forth, guests turning their heads like they just witnessed something on fire. A hotel staff member brushed past me in a rush, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She paused just long enough to whisper, "They're saying you attacked your father." I blinked. "What?" She didn't stop, just kept walking. I froze. The words didn't compute at first. Attacked? Me? But as I stood there trying to process it, the rest came like a slow-moving avalanche. I saw my father, now back inside, gesturing wildly to a cluster of guests near the stage. My brother was beside him, his arms crossed, his mouth moving. Twist S13. They were doing it again, rewriting everything. He became violent. I could see Dad mouthing. We had to restrain him. Unstable. We've dealt with this before. Then, my brother, he grabbed Dad first. It was aggressive. The same old script. Polished lies, seasoned with fake concern, and just enough truth to make them believable. People started filtering out of the reception area, some heading toward the valet, others just stepping out for air. But their eyes weren't casual. They were searching for me. Some found me. Their gazes narrowed, judging, whispering. One man I vaguely remembered from a family picnic shook his head at me like I just vandalized the church. A woman I didn't know clutched her purse tighter and turned away. I felt like I was watching a slow, precise machine dismantling my character, publicly and with precision. Grandpa moved beside me, reaching for the door handle, trying to push it open again. I'm going back in. They can't do this to you. I put a hand on his chest gently, stopping him. You're not going anywhere. You could fall. His eyes, always so composed, were glossy now. He whispered, "They're trying to bury you because they can't control you anymore." I swallowed the knot rising in my throat. He was right, and it hurt in a way even the slap hadn't. That was when a voice called out from the curb. It was my cousin Mark, tall, stocky, always the one with something slick to say at holidays. "Dude," he said, walking over, "why would you hit your dad? Especially today?" I stared at him. "What? Come on, man. There's kids in there. You couldn't have picked a worse time." I didn't lay a hand on him, I said calmly. He shrugged, almost disappointed I didn't give him more drama. "Your dad said you've always been jealous. Said you got mad because you weren't part of the plans." That was it. The bile rose. Not because of what he said, but because it was familiar. This was the same pattern from every year, every fight, every misunderstanding that was never allowed to be clarified. I was the problem, always. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister lit up the screen. Dad told the bride's family, "You're trying to sabotage the wedding because Grandpa never loved you." I stood there, rereading it. A second message followed. "They're telling the MC to disinvite you publicly. You need to leave." Twist S14. Something inside me snapped, but it wasn't the messy kind of break. It was clean, sharp, like a rope finally fraying to the last thread and letting go. "They're ripping your name apart in there," Grandpa said, staring at the building, "and they think I'll let them get away with it." I looked at him. His jaw was clenched. The same man who had kept his dignity in silence all day now radiated quiet fury. I nodded. "Then we don't go back in. Not for a second." I closed his car door gently. I stood beside the vehicle, watching through the glass as the storm inside brewed hotter. People were talking now, some pointing toward the doors, others looking visibly unsettled. Then someone new approached, a wedding planner in heels, phone pressed to her ear. She lowered it as she neared me. "I'm so sorry," she said carefully. "Is it true the family wants you removed from the property?" I didn't answer right away, just exhaled slowly. My father wasn't backing down, he was doubling down. "If they want me gone," I finally said, "fine. But Grandpa leaves with me." Her eyes widened. She wasn't ready for that, not with the rumors, not with the pressure. But she nodded slowly, understanding the stakes were much higher than a wedding schedule. And just then, through the glass, I saw the microphone light up. The MC stepped up on stage. And then I heard the microphone crackle inside. The MC was about to reveal Grandpa's wedding gift, and everything was about to explode. The microphone crackled, sharp and sudden, spilling out into the stillness of the evening air. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice rang out from the speakers mounted inside the reception hall. "Before we move on to dinner, we'd like to take a moment to honor a very special gift from the groom's grandfather." I was still standing by the car, one hand resting on the roof. Behind me, Grandpa sat silently in the passenger seat, his back straight, eyes fixed on the venue doors like he already knew what was coming. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. I couldn't see much from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I could feel it. The room had gone quiet. Then came the announcement that cracked the entire foundation beneath them. A gift totaling $7.4 million. Even outside, I heard the stunned murmurs. Inside, heads whipped toward the back of the hall, toward the seat where Grandpa should have been sitting. But it was still empty, next to the restroom, next to the half-hearted decorations, just like they left it. Confusion rippled through the guests. Some turned toward the glass doors, now spotting me in the distance. Some were clearly doing the math. A few looked toward the stage, toward my brother, who stood frozen next to his new bride. Then Twist S-15 arrived like a final act of desperation. My father stormed the stage. He didn't even wait for the MC to finish. He grabbed the mic with both hands, his face already flushed, his voice sharp and theatrical. "He's not here," my father barked, "because Rowan dragged him out and ruined this moment." He turned and pointed, directly at the glass, at me. Dozens of eyes followed, every head, every camera. He wasn't done yet. He made this about himself. He's been jealous for years. And now he's taken this day away from his own brother. I stood still. Then, without a word, I stepped away from the car. The valet watched me, frozen with the keys still in hand. Slowly, I walked toward the lobby doors. I didn't hurry. I didn't hide. I pushed the door open but didn't step inside. I stood in the threshold, half in, half out, just close enough that every eye in the room could see me clearly, but not enough to be pulled back into their space. And then, from behind me, came the voice they hadn't expected to hear. No. It was Grandpa. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, solid, enough to slice through the noise and hit every corner of the room. "I left on my own," he continued, "because you disrespected me." You could feel the silence shift, from surprise to disbelief. Then a slow ripple of shame. "I was seated like a forgotten coat," Grandpa said, now stepping out of the car with careful footing, "by the restroom, while you toasted yourselves. And when Rowan spoke up, you slapped him in front of strangers." Murmurs spread again. Eyes darted between my father and me. Then back to Grandpa, who stood straighter than he had all day. "I will not reward cruelty," he added. "Not with money. Not with silence." My brother looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. My mother put a hand over her mouth, whether in shock or shame, I couldn't tell. Dad tried to cut in. "Dad, don't do this." But Grandpa raised his hand. The same quiet gesture he used when we were kids, and wouldn't stop fighting. The whole room went still. "For the gift to be given," he said slowly, "I must be present, and I will not return." The MC looked completely out of her depth. "So, the gift," Grandpa didn't blink, "will not go to the groom. I will revise it." The gasp was collective, like someone had released the pressure valve on a boiling pipe. And right there, in that instant, I watched everything crack. All the years they had polished their image, all the little humiliations they made me swallow, all the backhanded silences my mother chose, all the sibling complicity. It all came undone, not with rage, not with noise, but with Grandpa's calm rejection of everything they stood for. Dad, desperate now, shouted, "Rowan manipulated you. He's doing this for the money." I didn't flinch. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I didn't even know about the gift. I stood up because he deserved dignity. Something you stopped giving a long time ago." Grandpa turned toward the crowd. "From this day forward," he said, voice trembling with something close to pride, "Rowan is the only one in this family who treated me like I mattered." That was it. The final blow. You could feel the shift. People started turning in their chairs. Some crossed their arms. A few stood up and walked toward the back of the room. The sympathy that had been reserved for my father earlier was evaporating, replaced by something heavier, judgment. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Not fury, not control, just the helpless recognition that he was no longer writing the story. I felt my legs shake, not from weakness, but from the weight of finally stepping out from under him. I turned back to Grandpa, helped him gently into the car again. He nodded at me, lips pressed tight. Then I closed the door, walked around the front of the vehicle, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine was already running. As I shifted into drive and pulled us away from the chaos behind, my phone lit up with the first of 30 missed calls, none of which I intended to answer. The tires hummed softly against the pavement as I guided the truck out of the venue's circular driveway. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. Beside me, Grandpa sat quietly, hands folded on his lap. His breathing was steady, his eyes watching the dim road ahead. The late evening sky was giving way to night, streetlights flickering on one by one like they were ushering us toward something softer, something quieter. My phone buzzed again on the center console. I glanced at the screen without picking it up. 32 missed calls, and counting. My mother, my brother, my father's name blinking like a fire alarm. I flipped the phone face down and pressed my palm against it, as if that could silence not just the noise, but the history that came with it. We didn't speak for the first few miles. There was nothing urgent to say, and after everything, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Then Grandpa spoke, his voice low but steady. "I'm sorry you've carried so much alone." I gripped the wheel tighter, suddenly aware of the ache in my chest. His words landed in a place I didn't realize had been waiting, starving, for someone to just see me. "I didn't mean for you to carry it," he added, more softly now. But I saw it. I saw all of it. A lump built in my throat. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. That being the one they ignored, dismissed, blamed, was just how family worked. But having him say it out loud, with no agenda, no pity, just truth, it cracked something open. He turned slightly toward me. "A few weeks ago, I started rewriting my will." I glanced at him, surprised. "Not because of money," he went on, "but because I saw the way they treated me, especially when I got sick. At the doctor's office, they rushed the appointments. They talked around me, not to me. Your father barely made eye contact. Your mother was always too tired to come." He let out a slow breath. "But you sat with me. You asked questions. You listened, even when I didn't have answers. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing, just nodded and kept driving. By the time we pulled into his driveway, the sky was fully dark, Porch lights spilled a warm glow over the small walkway. I stepped out first, walked around, and opened his door. "I've got it," Grandpa insisted, but I offered him a hand anyway. Inside, everything was still. Familiar. The smell of old books and wood polish. I helped him settle into his favorite chair by the window. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a framed family photo, one I'd seen 1,000 times. I'd been cropped out. Again. An accident, they always said. It used to sting more. Tonight, it was just a reminder of what I was choosing to leave behind. Grandpa followed my gaze. "You didn't lose anything today," he said. They did. They lost the one person who still believed they could do better. I sat down across from him, the words settling deep, not because they made it all okay, but because they were real. I finally reached for my phone. It was still buzzing. Voicemails stacked up like bricks in a wall I no longer wanted to climb. Mom's voice, crying, accusing. My brother, cold, frustrated. "You embarrassed everyone. How could you?" Dad's, full of anger. "Call me back and fix this now." Not a single one asked if I was okay. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, with steady fingers, I typed one message into the family group chat. "I won't be part of a family that hurts the people they claim to love. I'm done being your silent scapegoat." Then I turned the phone off completely and slid it into the drawer of the end table beside me. Grandpa nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you." I didn't respond right away. Those words, coming from him, meant more than I expected. Not because they validated me, but because they came from someone who had seen me, even when I hadn't seen myself. I stood and stepped outside onto the porch, needing a breath of air. The night was cool and still. Crickets murmured in the distance. I looked up at the stars, something I hadn't done in a long time. Somewhere in that quiet, I realized something. Standing up for myself hadn't changed who I was. It had revealed who I'd been all along. No one had ever handed me a version of myself I could believe in. I had to build it, piece by piece, in the silence of being overlooked. And now that I'd finally stepped out of that silence, I wasn't going back. I heard the screen door open behind me. Grandpa's silhouette appeared briefly, then returned inside. A soft click followed. I glanced back through the window, and there it was, sitting on the side table again. The old pocket watch. The same one he held that day at the wedding doors. Only now, it wasn't a symbol of being forgotten. It was a reminder that I walked away with the one person who never saw me as invisible. And maybe that was enough. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to leave the place that taught you to stay quiet. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of who I was without them.